This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. We all plan our life. We plan it as little children. A lot of young boys say they want to be a fireman or a policeman, and girls want to be a princess or maybe even a doctor. Um, but it doesn't mean that all those plans that we make early on or even day to day really get fulfilled. But there is a way to look ahead and work towards our passion, and that's having purpose in life. And my guest today is Marcy. And Marcy, say your last name for me so I don't mess it up.
Pusey, Marcy
Pusey.
Pusey.
I thought so, but I figured if I did, if I said it that way, it's going to be something else. Uh, and I met Marcy through podmatch.com. And what I love about this organization is that you get to know the person even before you meet them because their bios and the information that they are out there sharing is so immense. And Marcy, in your bio, you talk about how you're coaching and you've done a TEDx as well, but you bring out your reality into that. So you're not talking about case studies, but you're talking about what Marcy has experienced, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So give us a little bit of background of, what sort of triggered that, hey, I need to get out there and share my life.
Yeah. I I think from quite young, I had an ability to feel, well, certainly my own pain, my own joy, but I was able to recognize that in other people as well. I always was a voice for the underdog as a kid. Um, Always the outcasted kid or the different kid in my classroom. Like I was going to be their number one voice. I didn't know necessarily how to do that for myself, but I could see it in others. And I thought, well, even if I don't have it, at least I can show it for someone else. I don't know that I had all the cognitive awareness around it, but I just operated that way. I didn't know how to be my voice, but I knew how to passionately defend someone else. And so I think that just carried with me through the decisions I made, both vocationally, educationally, and up to now, as far as the topics I choose to speak and write on. So I think initially there was an internal processing of my world and then a recognition that other people experienced those things too. And so, man, if I can step into their story in some way and offer them the hope or the healing or the encouragement that I so desperately long for myself, then it's not in vain. It's not wasted. I'm using it to give to someone else. And then I learned along the way, there was kind of a gift in return that if I did get to give someone something I either didn't feel I had or had gotten and loved and was so grateful for, it I don't know, there was a good feeling there connected to, right? Like, it made me feel good to know that I could impact someone else's life. So I think that's been sort of the journey for me and some of the recognition that I've had around how my own personal story can support other people.
Well, and one of the things that um, we're all becoming more aware of
Yeah.
is that we all have some form of mental illness.
Mhm.
Um, I know growing up, uh, nobody really wanted to talk about it. My father had a cousin, and um, when he wasn't, as my father would say, acting right, um, it would be, well, he needs his rest. And so cousin Bert was just away for a while getting
Wow.
rest. And as a young kid, I didn't understand that because when I saw cousin Bert, um, he was very lively, he was working, he was doing everything normally. Um, and it wasn't until years later that, I was talking to another cousin and I found out that, he suffered from some form of mental illness. Nobody put a label on it. Um, and it all sort of made sense. It was like, yeah, I can see that now.
Yeah.
Um, but why were we like putting blinders on? Um, but I think up until maybe the last 10 or 20 years, we saw it as something very shameful.
Yep.
So in your speaking, because you talk about the fact that you have experience in mental health and trauma.
Mhm.
Um, so like I said, about 20 years ago, if you would have gotten up there speaking, people probably would not have wanted to listen because it's like, well, she has trauma, so she must not really know what she's talking about.
Right.
How do you think that people are overcoming this now and want to hear your story?
Yeah. I think that could be twofold. The first part being that there are just so many other brave people boldly having these conversations now, regardless of how they might have been perceived, and bringing awareness to and normalizing life with emotional challenges, psychological challenges, physical challenges, whatever it might be. I think of Brene Brown's work. Like, she's definitely been an early voice in the way of talking about vulnerability and shame, and that so connected with people who needed to know that we don't have to live with shame
Right.
and that we can live vulnerably, and how do we have good boundaries and know who to trust and not to trust, but still like be brave with our stories. And I imagine she had backlash. I know that with her first TEDx talk or TED talk, she immediately was wanting them to pull it down and never share it. She was so embarrassed by it. And
Oh,
then it
wow.
and then
Yeah.
it like took off, which terrified her because she was so embarrassed by it. But then we know now the impact. So I think in part people like Brene and others who've said, let's start talking about this. Um, I think that's one part of it. I think also there has been such a beneath the surface longing, and I mean, I'll use desperation again, to be able to be real with our life struggles. It is exhausting to hide everything that's going on. It's
Right.
exhausting to wear the mask in public and put on the smile and act like I'm okay when you're dying at a soul level, or at a mind level or emotional, whatever it might be. There's been all these sorts of dying that people have experienced. And I think we just collectively got really, really tired of dying quietly and alone. And as soon as someone was willing to talk about it and we got to see ourselves in the conversation, then all of a sudden, okay, this is a place where we can, it's a safe space. We can talk about these things. So I think those are the two parts, like the timing of the voices being bold and brave to address things that had been hidden or secretive, or the family skeleton in the
Right.
closet, and our collective exhaustion around trying to hide it for so long.
Well, I know that in 1996, my youngest son was pulled out of his classroom by the social worker, unbeknownst to mom and dad. And about 2 hours later, we got a phone call asking us to come into the school. And my son was the most social child in the world up until that day.
Mm.
And we got pulled in, and she said, I believe your son is on the autism spectrum. Um, Here's a list of doctors, find your own doctor. We'd like a diagnosis here at the school. And I said, whoa, like he's been in daycare, he's been in private kindergarten, now he's in first grade. What's going on? And she said, well, we had a fire drill today, and he refused to go. He was screaming, hiding underneath his chair. And yes, he didn't like loud noises. Um, we had talked to his doctor about this over and over, and the doctor kept saying he'll grow out of it. Well, as it turns out, he is on the spectrum. Um,
Wow.
and this same social worker suggested right from the beginning, we want to hear his voice. We want him to be able to tell his friends that he's on the spectrum, but he's just like them.
Mm.
Elementary school worked perfectly. He had tons of friends. He did everything right. Um, his dad and I were very supportive. He got to middle school and his life got terrible.
Mm.
But we kept speaking out, and he
Yeah.
became a public speaker for it as well.
Wow.
And that's what helped him and us. And that's what I love about doing these podcasts with people like you, because we've been through it.
Yeah.
And yes, I will say probably 8 years of our life probably wasn't fun at all,
Yeah.
because he lost friends, we lost friends, but we stuck to our guns. It was
Yeah.
like, we're not gonna hide. like you said,
Yeah.
hiding was killing us.
Yeah.
Being
Yeah.
out in the open, if you don't like me, okay, you know, walk away. But I'm finding now that more people are coming out in the world, which I think is wonderful. And we're finding where we're vulnerable,
Yeah.
but it's, you know what? It doesn't hurt as much as it used to.
Yeah. Yeah, there's still people out there who will say negative things because of wherever they are in their life and the things that give them hits or fixes for whatever ego, right?
Right.
Okay, they're going to do their thing, but I think you're right that in general, there's so much more opportunity to talk about these things and be celebrated for it, to be acknowledged, to find community. And I think one big piece is that previously we were in silos, living our quiet, shameful lives, right? Our sense of shame, alone, thinking that we were the only ones. And as people began to speak about it, we were able now to develop community. I imagine now it's not a hard thing at all to find other families with somebody on the spectrum, because there's Facebook groups, there's local
Right.
community groups, there's organizations everywhere that are providing spaces for people to come together. And I think that's another piece of the progression that we've seen in our ability to heal and to be open about these things, is that we found others. We found that we were not alone and we could come together and share that common experience and say things like, as an adoptive and foster mom, when I'm in a foster adoptive community, people can say things in those spaces that they would never say to anyone else because they wouldn't get it, right? You would be judged, you would be crucified, like
Yeah.
it just. But when you're in a safe place with people who get it, you can say the things and let them be processed with people who get it and aren't judging you, and come out with a healthier mindset, even if what you said at first was just real honest truth. um, yeah, that just the power of community is so, so important, and another piece of what helps us move forward in our own stories, but like linked arms with other people who are walking something similar.
Well, and I'm hoping that those stories filter out of those groups so
Yes.
that our
Yep.
neighbors can become more accepting.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I don't know if you watched the Academy Awards last night and all the hoopla that's going on
I
that
saw some things in the news.
yeah, Will
Yeah.
Smith hit Kid Rock because of something that was said.
Yeah.
None of it should have happened, okay? But it happened, okay? And so now on all the social media, everybody's taking sides one way or the other. And I think what we all have to do when these things happen, because they happen in our own families, okay,
Yeah.
on a smaller
Yeah.
scale, I think we have to look at it and go, okay, there are two sides to the story. Neither one of them is right. Okay. Now let's learn from it. Because if we learn from this mistake, instead of pointing the finger at both people, well, you're going to go with the side that accepts you. And you're going to walk around and say, I won. And the other one's going to do the same thing. It's not about winning.
Yeah.
It's about coming together and understanding. Um, when I look at some of the things that you've talked about, um, and I have to commend you on being an adoptive and foster parent because um, it takes a lot of heart. Okay. It's not just being able to wake up one day and say, hey, I want to do this nice thing. It's not nice unless it's all integrated and it's coming from the heart. Um, and I say that because my parents wanted to become foster parents, and I was a bratty 9-year-old, and I'm the one who put a stop to it. And my heart goes out because I
Mhm.
didn't understand what that was all about. But when you're talking to people, do you get this feeling, whether you're coaching or you're doing an actual talk, do you get the feeling ever that people are sitting in there and saying, well, Marcy can do it, but I can't?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I've even been told that. And here's my perspective on that, and even something you said. I don't think everyone should do it. I think it was you at 9 having some level of awareness around how much you wanted to share your home, your space, your parents, and maybe you didn't have the adult awareness you do now, but you brought what you had and you were able to speak it. And it's also cool that your parents honored that. Um, we say, I shouldn't say we say, I would say the voiceless population in the foster adopt community are the birth children who are being raised alongside foster and adopted children who never had a chance to say or be heard or really understand. And that doesn't mean that we don't welcome them into that, or I'm not saying now to everybody,
Yeah.
look what you've done to your birth children. They didn't have a voice, but there needs to be a level of awareness around their journey, because to contradict the desires of your parents is like psychologically difficult, right? Like there's an
Right.
internal wiring to not divert from the values of your parents and of your family. Maybe at certain ages, there's yes, I want to divert, but generally, right, for younger children. So all that to say, like I heard the potential for some self-judgment there of like, I just didn't understand it. And I want to say there's no judgment there. I applaud your parents for listening to you and for you using your voice. And okay, if that means you weren't a home for somebody, there might be a reason why. Who knows? That's where we can't step into like the theoretical or the hypothetical. What would
Right.
have been, we don't know. But I do know that not everybody should. You can, though, participate. I think everyone has a role to play, but not everyone has to be the bed space for somebody. And that is something that was not talked about. I don't know how much is talked about now, but I talk about it. And it's hard to find families. So when I say things like this, the agencies, the counties are like, stop it, we need every single bed we can get. Yeah, we absolutely do. And I think if someone feels compelled and is willing to do the work and has, I don't want to say the heart as if the other people don't have the heart, but that maybe there's like this compulsion that's a heart desire to go do this and to do the work and to learn it and to come in with the right expectations, then by all means go do it. We need families who are willing to be caring adults for kids who need a home. We also need families and people to help fundraise or financially support families who are doing international adoptions, let's say, or we need families who are willing to take a weekend, a respite to give another family time off. We need babysitters. We need people that can be listening ears. There's a role available to everybody. It doesn't have to look one specific way. So I think if someone were to say to me like, oh, Marcy could do it, but I can't, I'd probably just engage a conversation there. Like, tell me more about that. Like, what do you think stands in the way between, you being able to do it versus me being able to do it? And I might tease out what the perceived obstacles are and then gauge together, like, are you right or are you wrong? I don't even know if I was supposed to do it, in a sense. I'm like, man, was I the right person? I don't know. That felt way harder than I thought. And I went into it with education in social services. I'd worked in group homes and foster agencies and CPS, like all over. So I felt pretty well informed. And even still, I was blindsided by the reality of the needs of kids and the impact of those needs on the family unit. Um, that being said, if I step back from the actual experience of it, my faith journey as a believer in God says that there was a purpose for me, even if I can't see it or understand it now. So even sometimes when I question myself, like, should I have been the one? I do feel called. I felt spiritually called to do that. And I trust now that the lives of my children, who are on their very own unique paths now as young adults, is entrusted to Him. Like, I did my part to the best of my ability with what I had. God knew that when He brought them into my home. So there's even some relief there. Like, you knew I'm dirt and you still gave me
I
these
love
kids.
that.
Yeah. So I think that can add another level for people for discernment, whether they're coming from a faith journey and there's a spiritual element to their decision making or there's not. But I think it does come down to just a really honest evaluation of, is this the role that you're meant to take or not? And it's okay if it's not, and it's wonderful if it is, but we need everyone to participate in some form.
I love that. And the role that a lot of us can take is just supporting the families, like you
Yeah.
said, who are ready to take this journey.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
and part of the reason, and understand it more now, and I've talked about it ever since I was 9 years old. I was the youngest of three, two older brothers. My grandparents called me the princess, although I wasn't treated like a princess, but I love the name. And I didn't want to share
Yeah.
my family.
Yeah.
Um, and as I got older, I kept apologizing to my parents because as I got older, it was like, probably would have been nice if I would have had a foster sister. Um, and my wheels kept turning. But it wasn't until I probably had my youngest son, who now is 31, that I started thinking about what did I do? And I did go back to my mother and have a conversation with her about it. And the interesting part was she said, "Your dad and I were glad that you threw a tantrum." I said, "No, I didn't throw a tantrum." She said, "No, no, you did." Um, and she said, "Because the more we thought about it, we weren't ready and
Mhm.
we weren't sure that we could continue to do everything we needed for you and your brothers,
Yeah.
plus having another child in the house who we
Yeah.
felt we had to do equally for."
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, so you're right. My parents had this open dialogue
Yeah.
back in the 50s when a lot of parents never would have. They just would have made the
No.
decision
Yeah.
and we all live with it.
Yeah. And then I'm just thinking too of you as a 9-year-old. Kids at that age and a lot of the younger ages think the whole world revolves around them. So you went through life thinking that you had so much power to affect every decision your parents made. And while you were a voice in their decision making factors, there were other factors they were considering. But in your mind, it sounds like all those years, it was like, oh my gosh, we could have taken in a kid and I'm the reason we didn't. And oh my gosh, like, what did I do? Versus like that conversation that got to happen later where you heard, that was one piece of it. And then we
Yeah.
took that, we listened, and then we made our own adult healthy decisions
Right.
based on multiple things. And I think that's so important too when we talk about the stories we tell ourselves, even from our childhood. My second TEDx talk, You Are More Than Your Traumatic Experiences, is on this to a degree. We're constantly assigning meaning to everything that has happened to us and is happening to us. And you had an opportunity, again, bravely, for both of you guys to be able to come together and have that conversation, to rewrite the narrative, like
Yeah.
to get more facts where you could go, oh man, that story I've been telling myself hasn't been complete. And I don't have to live with this like guilt or self-judgment anymore. I can actually see this as a gift I gave. Some people never get that because they're just so committed to the story they've been telling themselves that they'll die with that story. But when we're willing, again, in community, like if we go
Yep.
back to community, to bravely have the important conversations, we can actually change the story into one, a more realistic story, but also a story that's more supportive and helpful and impactful to our own mental, emotional, physical health, but also that of the people around us.
So you now are doing TED Talks. So there are people out there that still don't understand TED Talks. In fact,
Yeah.
I had somebody the other day say to me, "You mentioned on your podcast a TED Talk." And I said, "Yes." And they go, "Well, what's the difference between that and a podcast?" Well, podcast is different,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But how did you get involved in TED Talk? And
Yeah.
what is your experience like?
That's a great question. I actually never had any plans to be part of one. And then for anyone who's listening to going, yeah, what is a TEDx talk or a TED talk? They are special talks that are designed around talking through new ideas. And they can be through the lens of technology and education and the D. They're looking up, they stand for things, but new ideas. Now granted, I kind of think there are no new ideas, but there are ways to come to a platform and share something in a new way or in a refreshing way or in a way that engages the current culture or society uniquely. And so they just provide a platform for people to do that, but every talk gets heavily vetted, is taken through an interview process, an application process, and then you either are given the opportunity to present from one of those stages or not. There's the TED stage, which is the main original stage, and then the X stands for independently run stages. So they all go
Okay.
through the same process, but they're run by local volunteers who get to choose the theme and not hire because they're volunteers, choose the speakers, go vet them through the process, and set up their own unique event. So all of it ties together. They're all on the website.
Sure.
All of them end up on the TED website if they fit certain criteria. Okay, so I have enjoyed listening to them, never considered being on one of them, but an opportunity came up when I was at a conference to work with some people who help you know how to get on a TEDx stage.
Okay.
What are the application questions to expect, and what are, the best way to answer those questions? What's the best story to offer, or the best message to tell? Do you even have a message to tell? So I kind of met with someone and shared some of the things I could talk about, and they were like, oh yeah, that's great. That's great. And so I applied to multiple stages that had themes that I really resonated with and audiences that I thought I could help and support. And I ended up getting accepted to two within a few months of each other. And there was a third one on the line, but then COVID hit.
Got it.
And so the first stage was in Ghana, and I was able to record it virtually, but participate live the day of. And that was around raising leaders and empowering leaders to be impactful within their nation. So not just Ghana, but there was a focus there. Like, how do we get? So I spoke about the power of story on the brain and how we can, like, neurologically change and impact a person through story, and how that kind of empowerment develops resilience that develops leaders that can positively impact and change our world and our countries. So that was what I did through Ghana. And that was like a real quick turnaround. Like, I think I got accepted, and 10 days later I was presenting. Like,
oh, wow.
I had to write it, memorize it, present it fast. And what I applied to talk about isn't what I ended up talking about. So then I still had my original message, and then the stage in Washington, D.C. accepted me. And that was rigorous, like 6 months of regular trainings, submitting drafts of my message, going through masterminds, changing the message like for 6 months. So the whole message had to be approved. I had to memorize the whole thing. It was live on a stage. And that one was on how we can overcome our traumatic experiences. We're more than our traumatic experiences. So it was interesting because I had the African stage, which was like low key, easy going, quick turnaround. And then I had this Washington, D.C. stage, which is huge. Like, that's a huge stage to be able to participate with. And all the rigors of 6 months of like, am I going to get cut or not cut? Because people did get cut along the way if they didn't demonstrate a certain level of growth and commitment to timelines and that kind of thing. So it's incredible. But like you said, and then I'll sum it up here. They're meant to be like 5 to 10 minutes long. They're memorized, they're based on a new idea, but they're just one platform or one channel for getting a message out. Podcasting is another beautiful, wonderful channel and tool for getting a message out. Books, I've authored a number of books. That's another way. Speaking from at schools, whatever, like, we all have in front of us platform opportunities, and they're all beneficial in some way. And so making sure that we take advantage of those if we've got something to say that the world needs, and then catering them to that audience. This is conversational. I don't have to memorize it. I get to just share what I know.
Exactly.
And that's like wonderful. And they're longer than 10 minutes normally. So yeah, that's been my experience with them. I think it was an incredible experience, but it's not like, oh, once you've landed a TEDx stage, you've arrived and your message is out there. No, you continue to take advantage of every opportunity to share, because like you said, not everyone's listening to TEDx messages. So I want to reach those people too, because my message that you are worthy of value of love, or you're worthy of love and affection, that you hold value, that your story matters, like, that's for everybody, not just TEDx listeners.
Right. And, and for our listeners today, I look at our analytics. I don't sit and study them because to me, that's not all that important. It's when I get an email from somebody or a text message that says, oh, I'm so glad that you had, Marcy on, or you talked about a certain book. or you shared your story, because then we know that we're
Yes.
connecting, and
Yeah.
that's
Yes.
important. But I do remember, my mom was ill, but she still had her capacity, and we were talking one day, and she said, "What were you doing in the other room?" Because I had moved in with her for the last 2 months of her life, and I said, "Well, I was doing a podcast, Mom." "Oh, that
Oh,
radio thing." And I said, "Yeah, that radio thing." And she said, "Are you a famous radio personality?" And at first I was going to say no, and I said, "Sure, on my podcast."
yeah.
And my brother was sitting in the room, and he is a music producer, and he's won awards galore. And afterwards he said to me, "You know what? You are, even more than I am." And I looked at him, I said, "No, that's not true." He goes, "No, when you produce a song, it's only as good as long as it's being heard. And then when something
Mm,
else comes along, they forget it." And I thought about that. It was like, to some degree, you're right.
yeah.
I'm on daily. And so
Yeah.
touching somebody somewhere, but I
Yeah.
didn't make a big deal of it. But what I said to him was, we all get our word out in
Yeah.
our own way.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we don't have to podcast. We don't have to do a TED talk. You can be talking to somebody in the grocery store
Yes.
and sharing
Yeah.
how terrific this paper towel is.
Yeah.
And you know what? You may have made a friend for life.
Yes.
So,
So real. I I'm a story coach. I say I'm a trauma certified story coach because I am trauma certified. My background is all in therapy and whatnot. But that's exactly what I teach people. Your story matters, but it's not like the end goal is this huge stage or this huge book deal. If those happen, great, but that's still only one avenue. That's still
right,
only one audience. So how do we create a kind of story bank, or story bank, but also just healthy mindset so that if I am in the grocery store, I'm not so terrified of telling someone that these are the best paper towels,
right,
that
exactly.
I have this sort of giver mentality that I can approach every conversation or interaction and bring some kind of good to it. Even if I'm not telling a whole story, we're living a story and we have an
Exactly.
opportunity to show up in that story the best that we can. But again, it goes back to the narratives we've been telling ourselves, right?
Right.
And whether we think we have anything to offer. I've also heard other people say, I can't get on a podcast unless I'm an expert at something. I can't write a book unless I'm an expert. I can't be a coach unless I'm an expert. And I always come back to, well, first of all, really nobody, okay, this is a big statement, but I want to say, like, nobody's an expert under the definition that an expert is someone who knows everything there is to know about something,
Right.
right? Like,
Right.
maybe somebody out there somewhere knows everything about something, but like, it's so rare. And yet we call people experts basically because they know more than we know. And I think of the people who have been so influential in my life, and they were only 3 steps ahead of me, but those 3 steps were so important to me and they could help me take them. And so I didn't care what their title was. I didn't care, if they were an expert or weren't an expert, but can you hold my hand across my next 3 steps to at least get where you are? And we are all a number of steps ahead of
Right.
somebody behind us, right? And we're just like in this long sequence of people who can pull each other by the hands and say, come up here, and hey, let me come up to you. And so we don't have to wait until we feel like we have something to offer. You do by nature of existing, because that means you've already overcome things. Like, nobody's here listening who hasn't overcome something. Even if you're
Absolutely.
still overcoming, you're where you are in that overcoming story, and somebody else isn't even there yet. And they need your inspiration, your encouragement, your belief to know that they can take a step closer to the other side of overcoming as well. I want everyone to know that, like, no, when we say your story matters, that's not to be trendy or cliche. It actually does. It has such an impact on people. And you can just think of the ways you've been impacted and, like, just turn around and offer that to someone right behind you, wherever you have the opportunity.
You know, Such great words and advice, because again, so many of us go through life thinking that everybody else knows more than us, they're better than us. Um, and when you find that purpose, okay, I always was dreaming about, I'd like to do this, that, or the other thing. But if I tried working on it, if I didn't have the passion and purpose to do it, it just fell through.
Yeah.
The things that I really believed in,
Yeah.
okay, that I had experienced, watched somebody else experience, or really researched to the point that I felt that I was living it.
Yeah.
Those are the things that I could share. And once I accepted that, I don't have to tell Marcy's story, because telling Marcy's story doesn't come across the same way as Marcy tells it. And if I tell my story, it's authentic.
Yeah.
And that's why 10 years ago, when I started podcasting, I knew that my platform was going to be conversational. When I brought other podcasters on, that was the same concept. We could make a mistake, we can live up to it, because we want to be real.
Yeah.
And that's what it sounds like you're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. I so hope so. I know that I've been the audience member or the recipient of a story in some form, a book or a stage, and thought that person is so perfect. Like, wow, that's an inspirational story, but it's like one of a kind. You're the one, the you know, and yet when someone gets up on that platform and makes a mistake, like you said, or acknowledges mistakes they've made along the way, suddenly there's this place of connection that can happen. Like, oh, I make mistakes too. You
Yeah.
mean people who make mistakes can also live life successfully or with joy or with impact? Like, wow. And so to your point, even if our story is similar to someone else's, because that's something else I've heard. Like, what new thing do I have to offer? Like, there's so many overcoming stories out there. Yeah, but not yours. And if it's true that we need, what is it, like 7 positive reinforcements for every 1 negative we got, imagine how many positive stories we need to counteract the negative belief we hold. You get to be one more opportunity to be an inspirational positive story to somebody on a journey to their 7, just throwing numbers out, but to their 7, so that they can overcome that one negative belief that has just carried them through life. And so even that idea that, well, there's already so many out there. No, but your unique voice matters. And there might be someone out there who only understands through your language. I don't mean like actual linguistical language, but the way that you speak, communicate, your personality, your actual life experience. And so when we hold that back with all these fears or doubts or just messages, again, that we tell ourselves, I don't have something to offer, there's too many stories like mine, I haven't arrived yet, we are keeping back something so powerful from somebody out there who's waiting and needs it. And I often think again, like, what if Brene Brown had done that? What if Simon Sinek had done that? What if anyone who's been impactful to us had, in their own fear and self-doubts, withheld their story? We would all still be living the shame, not talking about vulnerability, not talking about purpose, but because they gave it a try, we get to now benefit from that. And I know that's been the how I've written and published too. My first book, Reclaiming Hope, was for the foster adopt community, and nobody was saying the things that I said, which is like, this is hard. Does anyone else think so? Because when I signed up, there were pictures of beautifully blended families holding hands, running through fields of wildflowers. And if you were to take a snapshot of my family, there's poop on the wall, there's someone screaming down the hall, there's like hair getting pulled out. Like, where's that snapshot? I had no idea, because we were all living in a silo. And so I put this story into the world, just really asking, like, anyone else think this is hard? Here's what I'm doing with it. And I got this resounding response, like immediate invitations to speak places and to do trainings and workshops and keep writing, because people needed it. But if I had stood back and said, I'm pretty sure I'm just an awful parent and person and made a mistake and I shouldn't talk about that, all the people now who've been able to experience my little anyone else would still be living in their own shame and their own silos and their own judgment. And now we get to say, no, it actually just is hard. So how do we reclaim hope? Why are we doing this? So I get to call us back to why,
right,
and the purpose, and what role should you fill, instead of allowing the conversation to go the way it had been going. And all of you listeners have that same opportunity to step into a conversation, even if there's one not happening, to begin the conversation with your story. Or if there's already loads of examples like yours, bring yours, because you're gonna be that one more little gem that somebody needs on their journey to truly, truly believe it for themselves.
It's interesting because you sparked a memory for me. Back in the 80s, I had been diagnosed with migraines, back in the 60s, and I've had them my whole life. And I work through them. And a lot of times people will say, you can't have a migraine. It's like, I'm not going to spend my life in bed.
Yeah.
Um, but in the 80s, I didn't really know anything about support groups, but I knew that my husband and I were having a hard time dealing with my chronic
Mm,
headaches. Um, I was going to work, and yes, I was working, but my eyes were rolling in the back of my head. He would say to me, I don't want you driving, but I had to drive to work. And
yeah.
so I finally, and this is before the internet as it is today, I started contacting hospitals and doctors and saying, hey, this is what I want to do. And I got enough support that 2 hospitals said, yeah, you can have this small little room once a month, and whoever shows up, shows up. And the first time, nobody showed up. And of course, I sat there and cried. Oh, I'm a failure. But a doctor came in and he said to me, no, you're not, because I know who you are now. And I know you really
Mm,
mean this is what you want to do. You need to understand that you're not the only one who suffers day to day. So it took a while. We built it up for a while. We ran it for about 3 years.
so people began to come.
People started to come. There was no money to make, there was no awards to be given. The award was knowing that I was not alone. And for my
Yeah.
husband to understand he was not alone. There were husbands, wives, kids who were watching a family member suffer.
Yeah.
And, I was feeling bad for him. He was feeling bad for me. But once other people started walking into that room,
Yeah.
we didn't feel bad for each other. It was like, well, this is what I do. And this helps me for about 5-10 minutes a day. And they would go home. Maybe they would try it, modify it. Next meeting, we'd sit there and we'd talk about it. Talking and communicating, as you said,
Yeah.
community is so important. And you
Yeah.
don't know who's in your community until you open up.
And you highlighted something so important, and that is that we can so quickly judge the success of our story based on that first minute of feedback,
Yeah.
right? I stood on a stage and nobody clapped, or I put the book out and no one bought it, or and yet to persevere in belief that your story matters and that you need it to matter for you too. That's a huge piece of
Yeah.
it. We care about impacting others, but actually some of what I talk about in various other places is the power of storytelling on our own healing, like our own bodies heal as we tell our stories. And so I love that that doctor came in, affirmed you, said, I see you, I know you, I value you. And now that that's been established, people will trust you and come into it. And because you went back again,
Yep.
facing an empty room, that thing grew. A lot of people quit right there. Room one, I did it. It was a flop and a failure, and would have missed out on all that came from it after.
It was, and I still connect with a few of them over these years. Um, and I'm not afraid to let people know that, hey, today is a bad chronic pain day.
Yeah.
So, I may not look like I did yesterday.
Yeah.
Um, my language may change. Uh,
Yeah.
but you know what? That's who I am. And I
Yes.
want people to understand that that's okay,
Yeah.
because I'm taking those steps forward.
So
So,
good.
well,
So good.
how can our listeners find you?
Yeah. Yeah. So marcypucey.com is an umbrella that kind of houses everything I do. You can see my TEDx talks there. You can visit some of my other services. Not only do I help people tell their story, but I also have some publishing services to get that story actually into the world. So now you know how to
Wonderful.
tell it. Now let's actually put it into the hands of people. So that will direct you, marcypucey.com. And then I'm on Instagram at Marcy Marie. Uh, I'm only giggling because there is a Marcy Pusey. It might have been me years ago. I don't know how to access it. So there's like one follower and nothing.
Love
I went
it.
with my middle name now at Marcy Marie. But you'll find me there. And yeah, I mean, that will direct you to all the other places I hang out. And I've got some free guides available on my website too. So one of those is how do you heal through telling your story. That's one that is accessible at marcypc.com. So if anyone's like, man, I want to start there, that's a great way to get connected.
I love it. Well, I want to thank you for joining us. Hopefully, we'll have you back on again. And say hi to your kids for me. I feel like I know them already.
I bet. See, community and connection, right? You
You got
do
it.
in a sense. I sure will. And thanks so much for having me and for what you do. Thank you for running
Thank
your
you.
lane
I
so
appreciate it.
beautifully. It's and for trusting me with your audience. That's I don't
Oh,
think that lightly. So thank you.
absolutely. Have a great day, Marcy. Bye bye
Thanks, you
now.
too. Bye.